Welcome to Pustik Vane, your one-stop solution for book summary. Today we are here with the book named The Brother Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Let's start its summary. In his youth, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov is a coarse, vulgar man whose main concerns are making money and seducing young women. He marries twice and has 3 sons, Dimitri, the child of his first wife, and Yvonne and Elisha, children of his second wife. Fyodor Pavlovich never has any interest in his sons, and when their mothers die, he sends them away to be brought up by relatives and friends. At the beginning of the novel, Dimitri Karamazov, who is now a 28-year-old soldier, has just returned to Fyodor Pavlovich's town. Fyodor Pavlovich is unhappy to see Dimitri because Dimitri has come to claim an inheritance left to him by his mother. Fyodor Pavlovich plans to keep the inheritance for himself. The two men swiftly fall into conflict over the money, and the coldly intellectual Yvonne, who knows neither his father nor his brother well, is eventually called in to help settle their dispute. The kind, faithful Elisha, who is about 20, also lives in the town, where he is an acolyte, or apprentice, at the monastery, studying with the renowned elder Zosuma. Eventually Dimitri and Fyodor Pavlovich agree that perhaps Zosuma could help resolve the Karamazovs' quarrel, and Elisha tentatively consents to arrange a meeting. At the monastery, Elisha's worst fears are realized. After Fyodor Pavlovich makes a fool of himself by mocking the monks and telling vulgar stories, Dimitri arrives late, and Dimitri and Fyodor Pavlovich become embroiled in a shouting match. It turns out that they have more to quarrel about than money. They are both in love with Grushenka, a beautiful young woman in the town. Dimitri has left his fiancée, Katerina, to pursue Grushenka, while Fyodor Pavlovich has promised to give Grushenka 3,000 rubles if she becomes his lover. This sum is significant, as Dimitri recently stole 3,000 rubles from Katerina in order to finance a lavish trip with Grushenka, and he is now desperate to pay the money back. As father and son shout at each other at the monastery, the wise old Zosuma unexpectedly kneels and bows his head to the ground at Dimitri's feet. He later explains to Elisha that he could see that Dimitri is destined to suffer greatly. Many years previously, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov fathered a 4th son with a retarded mute girl who lived in town as the village idiot. The girl died as she gave birth to the baby, who was taken in by servants of Fyodor Pavlovich and forced to work as a servant for him as well. Fyodor Pavlovich never treats the child, Smartyakov, as a son, and Smartyakov develops a strange and malicious personality. He also suffers from epilepsy. Despite the limitations of his upbringing, however, Smartyakov is not stupid. He enjoys nothing more than listening to Yvonne discuss philosophy, and in his own conversations, he frequently invokes many of Ivan's ideas, specifically that the soul is not immortal, and that therefore morality does not exist and the categories of good and evil are irrelevant to human experience. After the humiliating scene in the monastery, the rest of Elisha's day is only slightly less trying. Dimitri sends Elisha to break off Dimitri's engagement with Katerina. Elisha then argues about religion with Yvonne in front of the smirking Fyodor Pavlovich. Elisha also gets caught in the middle of another explosion between Dimitri and Fyodor Pavlovich over Grushenka, in the course of which Dimitri throws Fyodor Pavlovich to the ground and threatens to kill him. But despite the hardships of his day, Elisha is so gentle and loving that he is concerned only with how he might help his family. After tending his father's wounds, he returns to the monastery for the night. The next day, Elisha visits Katerina. To his surprise, Yvonne is with Katerina, and Elisha immediately perceives that Yvonne and Katerina are in love. Elisha tries to convince them that they should act on their love for one another, but they are both too proud and cold to listen. Elisha has dinner with Yvonne, and Yvonne explains to him the source of his religious doubt. He cannot reconcile the idea of a loving God with the needless suffering of innocent people, particularly children. Any God that would allow such suffering, he says, does not love mankind. He recites a poem he has written called The Grand Inquisitor, in which he accuses Christ of placing an intolerable burden upon humanity by guaranteeing that people have free will and the ability to choose whether or not to believe in God. That evening, Elisha again returns to the monastery, where the frail Zosuma is now on his deathbed. Elisha hurries to Zosuma's cell, and arrives just in time to hear his final lesson, which emphasizes the importance of love and forgiveness in all human affairs. Zosuma dies stretching his arms out before him, as though to embrace the world. Many of the monks are optimistic that Zosuma's death will be accompanied by a miracle, but no miracle takes place. If anything, Zosuma's corpse begins to stink more quickly than might have been expected, which is taken by Zosuma's critics to mean that he was corrupt and unreliable in life. Sickened by the injustice of seeing the wise and loving Zosuma humiliated after his death, Elisha allows his friend Rakitin to take him to see Grushenka. Although Rakitin and Grushenka hope to corrupt Elisha, just the opposite happens, and a bond of sympathy and understanding springs up between Grushenka and Elisha. Their friendship renews Elisha's faith, and Elisha helps Grushenka to begin her own spiritual redemption. That night, Elisha has a dream in which Zosuma tells him that he has done a good deed in helping Grushenka. This dream further strengthens Elisha's love and resolve, and he goes outside to kiss the ground to show his passion for doing good on earth. Dimitri has spent 2 days unsuccessfully trying to raise the money to pay Katerina the 3,000 rubles he owes her. No one will lend him the money, and he has nothing to sell. At last he goes to Grushenka's house, and when she is not there, he is suddenly convinced that she has gone to be with Fyodor Pavlovich. He rushes to Fyodor Pavlovich's house, but finds that Grushenka is not there. While prowling on the grounds, Dimitri strikes Fyodor Pavlovich's old servant, Grigory, leaving him bloody and unconscious. Then he flees. He returns to Grushenka's house, and learns from her maid that Grushenka has gone to rejoin a lover who abandoned her several years ago. Dimitri now decides that his only course of action is to kill himself. But he decides to see Grushenka one last time before he does so. A few minutes later, Dimitri strides into a shop, with his shirt bloody and a large wad of cash in his hand. He buys food and wine, and travels out to see Grushenka and her lover. When Grushenka sees the two men together, she realizes that she really loves Dimitri. Dimitri locks the other man in a closet, and Dimitri and Grushenka begin to plan their wedding. But the police suddenly burst in and arrest Dimitri. He is accused of the murder of his father, who has been found dead. Due to the large amount of evidence against Dimitri, including the money suddenly found in his possession, he will be made to stand trial. Dimitri says that the money was what he had left after spending half of the 3,000 rubles he stole from Katerina, but no one believes him. Dimitri is imprisoned. Meanwhile, Elisha befriends some of the local schoolboys. He meets a dying boy named Elisha, and arranges for the other boys to come visit him every day. Elisha helps Elisha's family as the young boy nears death, and he is universally adored by all the schoolboys, who look to him for guidance. Yvonne talks to Smartyakov about Fyodor Pavlovich's death, and Smartyakov confesses to Yvonne that he, and not Dimitri, committed the murder. But he says that Yvonne is also implicated in the crime because the philosophical lessons Smartyakov learned from Yvonne, regarding the impossibility of evil in a world without a god, made Smartyakov capable of committing murder. This statement causes Yvonne to become consumed with guilt. After returning home, Yvonne suffers a nervous breakdown in which he sees a devil that relentlessly taunts him. The apparition vanishes when Elisha arrives with the news that Smartyakov has hung himself. At the trial, Dimitri's case seems to be going well until Yvonne is called upon to testify. Yvonne madly asserts that he himself is guilty of the murder, throwing the courtroom into confusion. To clear Ivan's name, Katerina leaps up and shows a letter she received from Dimitri in which he wrote that he was afraid he might one day murder his father. Even after the letter is read, most of the people in the courtroom are convinced of Dimitri's innocence. But the peasants on the jury find him guilty, and he is taken back to prison to await his exile in Siberia. After the trial, Katerina takes Yvonne to her house, where she plans to nurse him through his illness. She and Dimitri forgive one another, and she arranges for Dimitri to escape from prison and flee to America with Grushenka. Elisha's friend Elisha dies, and Elisha gives a speech to the schoolboys at his funeral. In plain language, he says that they must all remember the love they feel for one another and treasure their memories of one another. The schoolboys, moved, give Elisha an enthusiastic